That noise is a red-headed woodpecker. They're big. They're like the size of crows. Pretty birds. So if you've noticed, it's snowed. We've had a couple of snowstorms. It's actually just a couple of days after Christmas, so nice break to be building but cold. So today we're going to get in. We're going to work on getting the bottom part of the motor built back up again. We've got all the parts we need, got everything all cleaned up, so just some sit down, do some assembly. We'll get the bottom end put together. We'll push on towards the top end, and then we can come back around to putting it in the frame. And the frame is presently buried under Christmas boxes and tubes that we've been pulling around, and just all kinds of fun. I've got all kinds of cardboard everywhere. There goes a plow. We have transmission parts. Let me pull these out. Oh, let's warm some things up in here. Okay, first bag, big piece. There's our shift shaft. I think that's all we're gonna need. Transmission, and here we go. Transmission. This guy has all its gears. This is a used transmission, just hunted this on eBay. And on this one, here's the gear that was completely demolished. Now this one, all those gear teeth all sheared off. The rest of the teeth in here were okay. We'll reuse some of these retaining E-clips. And we'll get this guy all back together. And in here, some of these gears, this one had a tooth gone, one of the top gears, and a couple of teeth gone down here. So this guy was shot. So there we go. And I do have the stator bolt that I need to replace, so I think we might have everything here. I do have to pay attention. There is a ball bearing that goes on the end of this push rod for the clutch, and I need to hunt that down and see if that's still in the center of the crankcase there. So I'm going to set up and start slowly going through. Alright, so today we're going to start to put this motor back together again. We have a new used transmission. All the gears are here. And we're going to start to put all this back together. I am going to call out one other thing that I've noticed while cleaning up the case. If you look down in here, a little tough to see, but down in this area, yeah, that's tough to see. The shifter rod comes through and presses in there, and the back side of that is all dinged up. So this is the shifting mechanism here. So the rod comes through, presses on this, and it twists it, and that's so when you pull your clutch. Let's see here. Let's actually line this up correctly. So orientation. Actually, if the motor was sitting here, your clutch cable, this is the left side of the ATV, you pull the clutch, this rotates this way, which has the bottom of this pressing on the rod that goes through. There's a 3/16 inch ball bearing, and then the other end of the rod that is attached to the basket. The other end of this, in the case behind this bearing, pretty goobered up in there. It's going to be okay though, but clearly, kind of stomping down on that shifter when it was all bound up, ultimately bent the shift shaft and put some big dings in the aluminum there. The other side of this, and I don't see any hole through, the other side of that shaft we were just looking in has this JB weld on it, And this looks right through here is where you'd mount your sprocket. This looks like the result of a chain breaking or chain getting thrown and smacking the case. So, you know, a reason for a good case saver. The other thing I'll call out is up here. All of this is either broken off or damaged off. If you're ever looking at buying cases on eBay, look at this area around where the shifting mechanism goes. Usually there's a whole corner that comes out here so that this spring here actually sits down and would sit in and hold the metal. This will be okay, this will work, but it is going to put a little extra slop in this spring for your clutch return. The alternative is to buy, in this case, a left side of the lower case. That's an easy $150. And really you want to buy matched cases, so you really want to buy both. You want to buy a left and right at the same time so they mate up well. We're not going to do that. We're going to run this as is. So in preparation, we've been through here with carb cleaner. We have lightly sanded the surfaces on this side, been wiping it down, really spent some time studying it to make sure we don't have extra metal shards in here, and paying attention, you know, that all the bearings are good. So here we go. First thing we're going to do is put back together our clutching mechanism. There's a washer. This washer is beat to all heck, but we're gonna use it. We're gonna run it. Washer. We have our seal. Press our seal back in. And our spring, you notice the little clip on the spring catches right in. And to get this right, I've got to get this spring hooked on what's left of this tab here. And again, ordinarily this spring would be hooking all the way over here, right by the end of my finger, but all that is missing on this case. So I'll call this out now as well. This arrow indentation and the one on the case here, that's where you're going to adjust your neutral clutch to. These two arrows will line up perfectly with each other. And inside we see our paddle is sitting nice and flush, and there's my actuation. So if I pull the clutch cable, turns in, presses the rod. Now we are going to build the transmission. We're going to build the shift star, the shift force in this side of the case, as opposed to the other side of the case that has my crank in it and my counterbalancer. Why is that? On these lifter forks, there's this E-clip here, and in my experience, the only way I can get this in is to build on this side of the case, because this E-clip goes down, and I can't have this dowel in first and then get the lifters in. The drum just doesn't work. On some of the other motors I've done without that, I can put the lifters in, then put the dowel down through. I can't do that with this clip. So I think you'll see what I'm talking about in a moment here. Got these, there's two washers. These two washers, thin one and a thick one, are going to go on the outside of this case. All right, so this is our sprocket side. Sprocket side drops through the left side of the case. This part of the transmission is where our shift rods are going to go down through, and ultimately this rod, we could drop this one in right now. On one side there's a little detent, and a 3/16 inch ball bearing is going to sit on there. This one, when it presses, or excuse me, when you activate the clutch mechanism, presses this, which will press on the other side of this rod, which if I flip this over will press the plate up and disengage the clutch. Set our star down in. And we're going to end up flipping this over. And part of the reason for this E-clip here on the other side of the case, it's a through hole, goes all the way through. The E-clip keeps it from going and just falling in. But that now allows us to insert the dowel once we have our lifter forks in where we want to go. So the order, number 1 and number 3, because we're doing this upside down, 1's going down first, followed by 3. Little finagling. Now the forks are in, dowels in, right down into the bottom. And getting that, when you try to build the transmission on the other side, that has been somewhat of a pain for me. This side we have number 2, because we flipped this over again, building into the left side of the case. The number 2 is going to go down. Can lift the transmission gears a little bit to get this right. There it is in the shift drum, and our dowel is back in. Right now is a good point to put our 2 dowels into the case. We got one on the back of the case. The other one's going to slip into the front of the case here. There it is. Okay, so once we get the other side of the case on, we'll end up having our Kickstarter gear will sit into these E-clips. We'll do that in a little bit. And over here is going to sit the counterweight from the other side. Obviously the crank's going to sit down in here. So let's we're just doing this on some blocks of wood today. Let's spread this out so we can flip the other side of the case over. We have to put some gasket sealer on here. Here's the other side. Something else that I noticed in here, this is a Wiseco crank, and I suspect this is a Wiseco piston as well. So somebody's been in here, done not only I'm assuming a top end, but done the crank as well. All right, we're using Moto Seal gasket maker. This is fuel resistant, so kind of ideal for 2 strokes. And we're going to set the other side on, and then we're going to use our crankshaft puller to get everything together. Spin our star, make sure our star can make it through. There we go. Now I have a Tusk crank puller tool. So to pull the crank, this side the crank's installed, and so we're going to flip the motor over now. Like so. And let's figure out what size we need. That size. Thread our crank puller on. Now the idea is we're going to be able to evenly pull the cases together because we want to pull the crankshaft in nice and even. Make sure everything's seated well, and then we'll back it off because right now it's going to pinch the bearing a little bit. Crank feels good. Crank feels good. Case halves are mating really nice. I think we look pretty good here. Now we're going to get our various case screws all back installed here. Get these all hand tightened in. Okay, case screws are all back in. Because we're already sitting on the stator side, we're going to go ahead and do the stator point now. Now, one of the stator screws was completely shot, so we did have to go OEM, got another one. Can't get this washer off. So we're going to do our own washer on here. And we know the stator works because we did have this up and idling, you know, a little dirty. We're going to run it. Wires all look good. So drop this in. I like using my hand impact for some of these because there's a lot of rotational mass. Kind of helps just to get everything all tightened right down, and that little weight sitting down on these Phillips heads also helps you not strip anything out. There's going to be a Woodruff key that goes down in here. Let me get this side of the motor. Okay, there's our stator. We'll set this right back where we had it. Get our little Woodruff key. Half moon key. There it is. I should be able to set this right down on there. There we go. That came in kind of nice. Nice big thick washer. Sits down in here. And because this controls timing, we want to make sure that we do hit this with some air. Make sure that's nice and tight. Let me get the air turned on. So I'm just finishing tightening this down. And again, I like using this hand impact. This is a, well, it's engraved PH number 3. It's a real thick head. The reason a lot of these screws get just really buggered out is people go in here and they use a Phillips number 2, which is really too small. They're, you know, they're round and blunted inside. Yeah, because you can look at even this guy. I really got into. Yeah, probably better off not even put that in there because you're gonna have to grab that with pliers to get out. The top screw here has this metal retainer because ultimately that's going to hold the stator wire once we get back together. This over here is the damage I was saying. This is the case saver. Ordinarily there's a whole piece that comes out here over the sprocket. This is all smashed out. So at some point it threw a chain, went in. Underneath you saw that JB weld. That's why all that's there. So we're done on this side of the motor. We're going to flip it over, feed through our shift shaft, and start building the clutch side. So on this side we have 2 washers. There's a thicker washer and a real thin washer here. We're going to drop the thin one down on here first, followed by our thick one. There we go. All right, the first thing we want to get in here, well, first 2 things. Because as soon as you start, if you put the clutch basket on, you won't be able to get out the other gears. So we want to get our kicker gear on. We need to get our gears that will engage the clutch on before we put the clutch basket on. And also we need to get our spring for holding our shift star. And we need to get our kicker rod through these first, and then followed by these, and then followed by your clutch basket. Otherwise, you'll really goof up your order of operation. What you also point out here is this is the other side of the dowel rod that had the E-clip on. So see how this one fed through? So now it doesn't go anywhere. Again, that's why it's a pain to try and build all your transmission in the other side of the case. So first, let's see if we can feed through the kicker. The old one was all bent. Usually it's a little bit of work to get these guys through. Oh, there he goes. Not too bad today. And we're going to tap him down until it sits over the gear there, the little teeth that come out of the star. And again, talking about order of operations, this is one I wish I'd put this in before I put the kicker in. So I'm going to back the kicker out. Leave it like that. This back part of the spring is going to sit up against this little detent in here. And this is a 10 mil bolt. Usually takes a little bit of finagling to get the spring in, get the arm, and get everything going as it needs to be. This is where you'll see a lot of guys do shift star mods, where they'll bevel off the other sides of the star here so your shifting is a little smoother. We haven't done that here. Obviously the cutoff side of the shifter is neutral, so we're somewhere, I think we're going to be in 3rd gear is actually where we're building this at the moment. So now let's come back through, get our kicker. There we are. All nice down there, meshed in. So I think you might call this the idler gear, but it certainly is the gear that will engage from the kicker on this side. So we have an E-clip, a washer, the gear, a washer, and an E-clip. Drop our washer down on. Notice the detent in the gear is going out towards this right-hand side of the motor. We'll drop our gear on, our other washer, followed by the final E-clip. There we are. Other side. Our gearing for the transmission. Pay attention here, there's a timing mark. So there's a little dimple there. There's a little dimple. Obviously there's a Woodruff key or least the key anyway. So as we get this gear down on, line this dimple up. Just like that. Perfect. I'm going to set this down also on that key. It's going to be a 19. Going to hit it with a little bit of air. Next, we're going to put our kicker gear assembly in. You have this part of the spring here. It's going to sit right down on that detent. Obviously, you see the other arm, and this long guy is going to reach right into the hole here. Excuse me, misspoke. This long arm comes around, sets in this internal hole. Now this spring shouldn't pop off, but this is a good place to be wearing eye protection just in case it does. So the kicker is all down where it needs to be. Now we're going to build the clutch. Here comes our clutch basket. Have all our washers on. The gears are going to mesh up here. There it goes. We have this washer with the hex cut out of it. It sits down on, and then it spins, which locks this basket in place. Also in here, you'll now notice I have a bending tab, retaining ring, and the washer in my hand. Down in. Down on. I'm going to hit it with a little bit of air. Because of locking, it's not as important, but we're going to get it nice and tight. Hold on to my piston and keep my fingers from getting pinched underneath it. Okay, now we got to bend that tab up. Make sure that this doesn't loosen when you're riding. Let's build our clutch. So I'm okay with these. So we're gonna run them. At this point in time, you'd look at the clutch basket really before. You're feeling for ridges down in here. There's a little bit of ridging on some of these. This guy, and it's the leading edge when you engage it. So there's some ridging. We're not going to file it out. I'll grab the camera and show you here though. Tough to see, but on the leading edge, there's all this dimpling. And we're going to run this basket, but really you either want to very carefully file that out or replace this basket, because that'll make for tough shifting, because ultimately it's each of these friction plates right up here. This has been creating this detent. So something to be aware of. Okay, so first, friction plate. Notice the metal plates here. They've got a little bit of color on them, which is unusual. I think that's come off from these friction plates from all the years sitting. I'm going to dare to run this. Notice the little protrusion here. We want to stagger those on these metal plates around the clutch. The second friction plate has this spring ring. Other metal plate, the protrusion, putting it off by a little bit. Next friction plate, next metal one, protrusion, again, staggering those. Okay. Now, all important, time to drop a 3/16 inch ball bearing down in there. See the detent on this side, the detent on the other side is facing up. This one is fixed because using this screw here is how we will actually adjust what we were referring to on this side for neutral. Adjusting that will bring this in line, something just like that. When we're ready, we'll do that adjustment on the bike. Here's our 3/16 Yamaha part number. There we are, 93503 16003. Without that, you wouldn't be able to disengage the clutch. Kind of important. Ta-da! Ta-da! Now, on the outside of the clutch here, we have this marking, this little circle dimple, and on the clutch basket, there it is. We need to line these up, otherwise if we don't line it up, the clutch will actually never engage. I did that on another quad I built once, missed that. There it is, sitting down. Nice and pretty. We're going to set our clutch springs in. These are 8mm, and I will be going back around here and setting the torque specs. This is just to spin them in nice and quick. We're going to reuse this gasket. It's in good shape from the previous build. These are all 8mm hex head. We have a new kicker. Oh, excuse me. There's our kicker. We're going to leave that off until we mount it back in the frame. Here's a shifter. It'll go in. Same thing. We'll leave that off till we get back in the frame. But that's it. That is a bottom end rebuild. So with that, we're going to move on to getting the top end put back together here. All right, so we just finished getting our bottom end together. All that came together quite nice. So we're going to move on to doing our top end. And this had really nice compression in the sense that I didn't actually test the compression, but it's sat for 5 years in the woods, and with a little bit of work, it kicked right over. So here's the top of the head. I'm not even going to touch that. Those surfaces nice and clean. Here's the other mating pair. Looks nice. The head bolts, they're all fine. When I look down on this cylinder, I don't have vertical scoring. Feels really nice in there. And looking at the bottom mating surface, all nice and clean. Kind of studying this. It's not a ported head. It's not a polished head down in there. One other piece to look at when doing this is to see if I see air gaps around the reeds. I don't see them. I haven't opened those up for a look, but we know the bike was running, idling well, so some of this we're just going to take at face value to get this thing back and going. So, looking at the gaskets here, these are the gaskets that came off. Set our top head gasket out of the way. I did not buy a new set of gaskets, and almost every build I've ever done, I've replaced gaskets, but these lifted off so well. And I know people are going to give me a hard time for reusing gaskets, but you know what? Alright, so jumping ahead a little bit, I put the cylinder on, and for the gasket, I actually put gasket maker just a smidgen on either side of the mating surfaces, then the gasket. And then we have these 4 bolts down here, 2 on each side, that hold the cylinder on. These go down to 18 foot-pounds. And I didn't need any kind of tool or anything to compress the rings to get the sleeve on. Just kind of with my fingers, just kind of gingerly, it slid right on. So that brings us to putting the rest of the head on. These bolts, 20 foot-pounds. So for this gasket here, you have this triangular pointed piece, points towards the front of the motor. Sets in just like that. Inside of our head there. Sets down just fine. And then we have our nuts with our copper washers. Just going to spin them down finger tight with a 12 mil. All right, we're set to 20 foot-pounds. We'll see if we can do this with it not mounted in the bike. Not doing anything with our reeds. Plugs in. And here I have my bolt to hold my shock. One of the motor mounts down front. Motor mount down low. Kicker nut. This is ready to go back on the bike. Okay guys, not too bad. We got the motor back into the chassis, and I'll walk you through what we did here. The motor is back on. I still have the carb inside because we're gonna go take a look at that because it still had fuel overflowing. We had to use the master link, take the chain apart, put it back on the sprocket. We have our stator wires back in color code to color code, and we have our clutch put in. Notice how far off this arrow is from this mark that we talked about earlier. Now also notice that this whole thing is tweaked. Some of this slack probably is back there, but we are engaging, disengaging, and we're moving through gears. So there's first gear, and we're engaged. That's second. Let's go. There's neutral. Spinning through neutral. Can you imagine how well that would work out as soon as you get out on the trail and you eat your stator wires? Those are going to have to get zip tied up out of the way for sure. But neutral. And let's spin a little. Click into second. There we go. Second. Oh, yep, right past. And just dropped it into first. So we've got to do carb. And once we do the carb, we're ready to hook the fuel up, zip tie out of the way, and start to get a feel for things. Not happy with this pedal. This was actually recommended for the blaster. However, the only way you can tighten is from getting underneath, and there's just no way. So, you know, China knockoff strikes again, because the threads are on this side, so you can't just reverse the bolt and go through. So the option really for this is to through drill it. However, I will also point this out. Stock blaster and aftermarket. Stock blaster has a little more reach. A little easier to get your boot down in there. It's like you're just going cheap by a ½ inch. But we can't reuse that. So through drill it, bolt, you know, with a nut in the back. That'll do that. So we'll pull that off for now. And I've got to get up underneath and do a bolt to hold the top of the exhaust, but really we're close. I think really it's I mean, it's not much. For it to be running is, you know, there's an hour and a half here. We don't have a cowl for it, so the wires are hanging everywhere. And I do still have on the other side some bolts to drill out and do some things. Another thing I'll call out. Everything says it's compatible for the blaster, right? So these are just, you know, run-of-the-mill. However, there's no way to get this clearance under here, underneath the throttle, which points your brake lever halfway down here. So I'm going to study this a little bit, because that's just, oh, and you have this other problem. You can't actually fully depress the lever because you're hitting right there versus just being in the fold. So we're going to study that as well. So, you know, it's really kind of a lesson in some of these knockoff parts. Everything claims to be compatible, but it's kind of like nobody actually looked. So I'm losing the light, so I'm going to clean up and park it there for the evening. But yeah, we're close to being able to put some clutch oil in here and see how she goes for a quick and dirty. All right, that's for another day.